He had not knelt for God in 12 years, had not spoken a prayer since the day he buried his family, but now Sebastian Thorne, the Duke of Winterbourne, the man they called the Godless Duke, collapsed beside her fevered body, his forehead pressed against the sweat-soaked sheets, and whispered Vivian like it was the only holy word he'd ever known. She was dying. The physician had left an hour ago with apologetic eyes, murmuring about consumption and God's will. And Sebastian had realized with terrifying clarity that he would trade his immortal soul, if such a thing existed, for one more day, one more hour, one more breath from the governess who had somehow become the axis upon which his entire world turned. "Don't you dare," he breathed against her burning skin, his voice breaking on words he'd never said to anyone. "Don't you dare leave me, Vivian, not when I've only just found the courage to love you." The woman in the bed did not respond. Her breathing was shallow, rattling, each exhale a battle she was slowly losing. Vivian Clark had arrived at Winterbourne Hall 6 months ago with a worn valise and excellent references, hired to educate Sebastian's orphaned niece after 3 previous governesses had fled the cold Duke and his colder estate. She was 26, plain by society's cruel standards. With serious gray eyes and brown hair she wore in a ruthlessly practical bun. She had no fortune, no family, no prospects beyond employment in houses like his. She was also the first person in over a decade who had looked at Sebastian Thorne and seen a man instead of a monster. "Your Grace." The housekeeper, Mrs. Bramwell, appeared in the doorway, her lined face creased with worry. "The fever's not breaking. Should I send for the vicar for last rites?" No. The word was granite, absolute. No vicar, no priests, no last anything. She's not dying. "But Your Grace, if her soul needs—" "Her soul is fine." Sebastian didn't look up from Vivian's face, from the way her lashes fluttered against her fever-flushed cheeks. "Better than mine ever was. If God exists, he has no claim on her that supersedes mine." Mrs. Bramwell made a small sound of distress at the blasphemy, but retreated, closing the door softly. She'd served the Thorne family for 40 years, had watched young Sebastian grow from a laughing boy to a devastated man, had witnessed the day he stopped believing in anything beyond duty and survival. But she'd also watched these past 6 months as Miss Clark had somehow reached through his walls, bringing something like light back to the hall. If the governess died, Mrs. Bramwell feared her master would die with her, perhaps not his body, but whatever remained of his humanity. Sebastian took Vivian's hand, so small and hot in his. Her fingers twitched, and he grasped them tighter, as if he could anchor her to life through sheer force of will. "I know you can hear me," he said, his voice rough. "You're stubborn enough to be conscious even when your body's trying to quit. So listen carefully, Vivian Clark. You don't get to die. You don't get to leave Lily without a teacher, or Mrs. Bramwell without someone to laugh with, or me without—" He stopped, swallowing hard. The words were there, had been building for months, but terror made them stick in his throat. What if he finally said them and she left anyway? What if love wasn't enough? But what if silence was worse? "Without the only person who makes me want to pray again," he finished, barely audible. "You came into my house with your books and your quiet competence, and you didn't flinch, not from my reputation, not from my temper, not from the ghosts that live in every corner of this damned estate. You taught my niece to laugh. You taught me to—" his voice cracked, "to hope. And I can't lose that. I won't." Vivian's lips moved, shaping words without sound. Sebastian leaned closer, desperate to catch whatever she was trying to say. "Not your fault." The words were a knife to his chest. Even now, burning with fever, she was trying to absolve him, as if he needed absolution more than he needed her alive. "Nothing is my fault except letting you get sick in the first place," he said fiercely. "I should have noticed sooner, should have insisted you rest instead of working yourself to exhaustion, should have—" "Your Grace," a new voice, sharp and cultured. Dr. William Ashford stood in the doorway, medical bag in hand, looking far more alert than when he left earlier. "I may have a solution." Sebastian's head snapped up. "You said there was nothing to be done. You said—" "I said conventional treatment had failed, but there's an unconventional option." Ashford moved to the bedside, his expression grave. "A new treatment, experimental, derived from willow bark and certain chemical compounds. It's shown promise in reducing fever and inflammation, but it's dangerous. The dosage must be precise, and there's risk of—" "Do it." Sebastian didn't hesitate. "Whatever it is, whatever the risk, do it now. You don't understand. If I miscalculate, if her body reacts poorly, the treatment could kill her faster than the fever. And if you don't try, she dies anyway." Sebastian's eyes were wild, desperate. "She dies and—" He couldn't finish, couldn't articulate the vast emptiness that yawned before him at the thought of a world without Vivian in it. Ashford studied him for a long moment, recognition dawning in his expression. "I see," he said quietly. "Very well. But you should know, the treatment requires constant monitoring for the next 12 hours. Someone must stay with her every moment, adjusting the dosage, watching for adverse reactions. It will be exhausting and terrifying, and there's no guarantee of success." "Then I'll stay. Tell me what to do." Over the next hour, Dr. Ashford prepared the treatment, grinding willow bark into powder, mixing it with clear liquids that smelled sharp and medicinal. He showed Sebastian how to measure drops into water, how to coax Vivian to swallow despite her semi-conscious state, how to watch for signs of improvement or decline. "Every hour, this exact amount," Ashford instructed, demonstrating the careful measurement. "Watch her breathing, her color, her pulse. If it weakens or becomes irregular, send for me immediately. And, Your Grace," he paused, choosing his words carefully, "pray. I know that's not something you do, but science can only go so far. The rest is between her body and whatever powers govern life and death. I don't believe in those powers." "Then believe in her." Ashford closed his bag with a decisive snap. "Believe that she's strong enough to fight. Sometimes faith in a person is prayer enough." After the doctor left, Sebastian settled into the chair beside Vivian's bed, the vial of medicine clutched in his hand like a talisman. The room was dim, lit only by a single candle and the dying fire in the grate. Outside, winter wind howled against the windows, rattling the ancient glass. Winterbourne Hall had never felt so much like a fortress under siege, and Sebastian had never felt less capable of defending what mattered. He administered the first dose as instructed, cradling Vivian's head, murmuring encouragement as she swallowed reflexively. Then he settled back to wait, to watch, to will her to survive through sheer stubborn determination. "Do you remember," he said into the silence, needing to fill it with something other than fear, "the day you arrived? It was raining, of course it was, this is Northumberland, it's always raining, and you stood in the entrance hall dripping on the marble, looking around like you were cataloging every flaw in the architecture. I thought you were judging me, judging the house, my life, my failure to maintain the standards my parents set. And then you smiled at Lily, who was hiding behind Mrs. Bramwell's skirts, and you said, 'I've always preferred houses with character. Perfection is dreadfully boring.' And I thought, this woman is going to be trouble." He laughed, the sound bitter and fond. "I was right. You were trouble from the start. rearranging the schoolroom, demanding funds for new books, insisting Lily needed fresh air and exercise instead of sitting pretty like a doll. You challenged me at every turn, but so politely I couldn't quite justify dismissing you for insubordination. You called it respectful disagreement. I called it infuriating. Vivienne's breathing hitched, and Sebastian froze, watching with terrible intensity until it steadied again. His heart hammered against his ribs. I started finding excuses to visit the schoolroom, he continued, his voice softer. To check on Lily's progress, I told myself, to ensure you were teaching appropriate subjects, maintaining discipline. But really, I just wanted to watch you. The way you'd tuck your hair behind your ear when you were concentrating, the way you'd explain mathematics like it was poetry, making numbers dance and sing, the way you never, ever treated Lily like a burden or an obligation, but like a real child who deserved joy. He paused to check her pulse, his fingers gentle on her wrist. Still too fast, but perhaps not quite as racing as before. He couldn't tell if he was imagining improvement or desperately inventing it. "Lily loves you," he said. "Did you know that? She told me last week. Said you were the best teacher she'd ever had, that you made her feel smart instead of stupid, that you listened when she talked about missing her parents. She said," his voice caught, "she said you were like having a mother again. And I realized I'd done you a terrible disservice, allowing a 9-year-old to love you, to depend on you, without ever acknowledging what that meant, what you'd become to this household." The clock on the mantel chimed twice. 2 in the morning. Time for the next dose. Sebastian measured it carefully, his hands surprisingly steady, despite the terror singing through his veins. He lifted Vivienne's head again, letting the medicine trickle past her parted lips, watching her throat work as she swallowed. "Good," he murmured, stroking her hair back from her damp forehead. "That's good, Vivienne. Keep fighting. Just keep fighting." He'd never felt so helpless. Not in war, not in the years after his family's deaths, not in any of the countless battles he'd fought and survived. Because this wasn't something he could defeat with strategy or stubbornness or sheer bloody-minded refusal to surrender. This was watching someone he loved slip away and having no weapon to fight with, except hope. Hope. God, when had he started hoping again? The answer was obvious. 6 months ago, when a rain-soaked governess had arrived and refused to be intimidated by his reputation or his grief. Sebastian let his head fall forward, exhaustion and fear making him lightheaded. And because she couldn't hear him, because he was alone with his terror and his truth, he whispered the words he'd been too cowardly to say while she was conscious. "I love you." "I've loved you for months, probably from that first week when you told me my library was criminally underutilized and proceeded to reorganize the entire collection without permission. I've loved you through every argument about Lily's curriculum, every quiet evening when you'd read in the drawing room and pretend not to notice me watching you, every morning when you'd appear at breakfast with ink stains on your fingers and apologize for staying up too late writing letters to your former pupils. I've loved you, and I've been too much of a coward to say it, too afraid of being vulnerable again, too convinced I didn't deserve anything good after everything I've lost." He pressed his lips to her fevered knuckles, a kiss that felt like a vow. "But I'm saying it now. I love you, Vivienne Clark. And if you survive this, when you survive this, I'm going to court you properly. I'm going to ask you to marry me, and I'm going to spend the rest of my life proving that I deserve the gift of your affection. I'm going to be the man you somehow always believed I could be." The wind rattled the windows. The fire crackled. Vivian's breathing continued its labored rhythm, and Sebastian sat vigil, a faithless man praying to a governess instead of God. The hours crawled past with agonizing slowness. Sebastian administered doses precisely on schedule, each time holding his breath as he watched for any sign that the treatment was helping or harming. He bathed her forehead with cool cloths, murmured meaningless reassurances, and told her stories about his childhood before tragedy struck, about the dreams he'd once had for Winterborn, about the future he wanted to build if only she'd stay to help him build it. Around 4 in the morning, he thought he noticed a change. Her breathing seemed less labored, the terrible heat radiating from her skin perhaps fractionally cooler. He told himself it was wishful thinking, refused to hope, but kept watching with desperate intensity. By 5, he was certain. The fever was breaking. By 6, when pale dawn light began filtering through the curtains, Vivian's breathing had settled into something approaching normal sleep. Her forehead, when he touched it with trembling fingers, was still warm but no longer burning. The crisis, it seemed, had passed. Sebastian sagged forward, pressing his face against the edge of the mattress, and for the first time since he was 19 years old, he wept. Great shuddering sobs of relief and exhaustion and overwhelming gratitude to whatever force, medicine, fate, Vivian's own stubborn will, had allowed her to survive. He was still there, drained and red-eyed, when Mrs. Bramwell came to check on them at dawn. "Your Grace," she breathed, taking in Vivian's peaceful face, the steady rise and fall of her chest. "Oh, thank God! She's going to live." Sebastian's voice was wrecked, raw. "The treatment worked. She's going to live." Mrs. Bramwell's eyes filled with tears. "Then we've witnessed a miracle." Or excellent medicine and a stubborn woman. But Sebastian's smile was shaky, uncertain. Perhaps miracles and medicine weren't mutually exclusive. Perhaps faith came in many forms, including believing that a person you loved was stronger than death. "You should rest, Your Grace. I can sit with her now." "No." Sebastian straightened, wiping his face with the back of his hand. "I'll stay. I promised I'd watch over her, and I'm not leaving until she wakes." Mrs. Bramwell nodded, understanding in her expression. She brought fresh water and towels, stoked the fire, and left them in peace. Vivian slept through the morning, her rest gradually becoming more natural, less the absence of consciousness, and more genuine sleep. Sebastian dozed fitfully in his chair, waking at every sound, checking her breathing, reassuring himself she was still there, still alive, still his to love, even if she didn't know it yet. "You should rest, Your Grace. I can sit with her now." "No." Sebastian straightened, wiping his face with the back of his hand. "I'll stay. I promised I'd watch over her, and I'm not leaving until she wakes." Mrs. Bramwell nodded, understanding in her expression. She brought fresh water and towels, stoked the fire, and left them in peace. Vivian slept through the morning, her rest gradually becoming more natural, less the absence of consciousness, and more genuine sleep. Sebastian dozed fitfully in his chair, waking at every sound, checking her breathing, reassuring himself she was still there, still his to love, even if she didn't know it yet. It was just past noon when her eyes finally opened. Sebastian was wiping her face with a cool cloth, humming tunelessly, something he hadn't done since childhood, when he realized she was watching him. Her gray eyes were fever-bright but aware, focused on his face with an expression he couldn't quite read. "Your Grace," she whispered, her voice like rusted hinges. "You stayed?" "Of course I stayed." He set aside the cloth, taking her hand carefully. "Where else would I be?" "I don't... What happened? I remember fever and pain and..." Her brow furrowed. "Dr. Ashford said there was nothing to be done." He was wrong. Or rather, he found an alternative treatment. "You've been unconscious for nearly 18 hours. The fever broke a few hours ago." Sebastian managed a smile, though his exhaustion made it crooked. "You frightened me half to death, Miss Clark. I'd appreciate if you didn't do it again." Something flickered in her eyes. Surprise, confusion, and beneath it, something warmer that made his heart stutter. "You were frightened? For me?" Terrified. The word came out before he could think better of it, raw honesty spilling past his defenses. "I've never been so terrified in my life, not even during the war, not even when—" He stopped, unable to mention his family's deaths, the old grief still too sharp. Vivian's fingers tightened weakly around his. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to worry anyone. I just felt so tired. And then everything was heat and darkness, and I thought—" She hesitated, color rising in her pale cheeks. "I thought I heard someone calling my name, like a prayer. But that's foolish. You don't pray." Sebastian's throat tightened. She'd heard him. Through fever and near death, she'd heard his desperate, faithless prayers. "Perhaps," he said carefully, "I've started praying again. Or at least, I've found something worth praying to." She looked at him, really looked, and he saw the moment comprehension dawned, the realization that something fundamental had shifted between them during the night, that they'd crossed some invisible boundary, and there was no going back. "Your Grace, Sebastian." He raised her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles that lasted a heartbeat too long to be purely platonic. "My name is Sebastian, and I think, after I've spent the night watching you fight death and win, we might dispense with excessive formality." "Sebastian," she repeated, testing his name like it was something precious and fragile. "I'm your employee. You shouldn't— we can't." "Can't what? Speak honestly? Feel what we feel?" He set her hand down gently, standing to pace the room, suddenly unable to contain the nervous energy flooding through him. "Miss Clark, Vivian, I've spent 12 years being the godless duke, the cold master of Winterbourne, the man too damaged by loss to risk caring again. And then you arrived, and within 6 months you've dismantled every defense I spent over a decade building. You've made me want things I thought I'd buried with my family. Hope, connection, God help me, love." Vivian's eyes widened. "You don't mean that." "I've never meant anything more." He turned to face her, and the raw vulnerability in his expression made her breath catch. "I love you. I think I've loved you since the day you told me literature was wasted on people who wouldn't argue about it, and then proceeded to fight me on the merits of poetry for 45 minutes while Lily played. I've loved you through every correction of my Latin, every reorganization of my affairs, every moment when you looked at me like I was worth something beyond my title. And last night, when I thought I was losing you, I realized I'd waste the rest of my life if I didn't at least tell you the truth." "The truth," Vivian echoed faintly. She struggled to sit up, and Sebastian rushed to help, propping pillows behind her with gentle efficiency. "Sebastian, I'm a governess. You're a duke. The difference in our stations is irrelevant. I don't care about stations or society or what anyone thinks. I care about you, about the way you've brought life back to this house, light back to my life, about the fact that you're the first person since my family died who makes me believe the world might be worth engaging with again." He knelt beside the bed again, this time not in desperate prayer, but in deliberate proposal. "Marry me. Not because I'm a duke or because you're my employee, but because we make each other better. Because Lily needs a mother who loves her, and I need a wife who'll argue with me about poetry and reorganize my library without permission. Because I want to spend the rest of my life proving I deserve your faith in me." Tears spilled down Vivian's cheeks. "You can't be serious. I have no dowry, no connections. I'm plain and practical, and I'll never fit into society. You need someone suitable, someone who... I need you. Only you. Vivienne, please. His hand found hers again, gripping tight. I know this is sudden. I know you probably see me as your employer, nothing more. I know I'm asking you to risk everything on a man with a terrible reputation and a traumatic past. But if you give me a chance, if you let me court you properly, show you what my intentions are, I swear I will spend every day earning your love. If you can ever love someone as broken as me. Broken? Vivienne's voice was thick with emotion. Sebastian, you're not broken. You're grieving. You've survived unbearable loss and kept going. Kept honoring your responsibilities, even when it hurt. That's not broken. That's strength. Then be strong with me. He pressed his forehead against her hand, the gesture almost reverent. Be my partner, my equal, my wife. Help me rebuild this house into a home. Teach me how to laugh again, how to hope. Let me love you the way you deserve to be loved, fiercely and faithfully and forever. The room fell silent except for the crackling fire and Vivienne's shaky breathing. Sebastian waited, heart in his throat, for her answer. He'd laid himself bare, offered her everything he had to give, and now the vulnerability was nearly unbearable. Finally, Vivienne spoke. I need to tell you something. Before I answer, before we go any further, you need to know the truth about why I came to Winterbourne. Sebastian raised his head, confused. What do you mean? She took a deep breath, gathering courage. I didn't apply for this position at random. I applied because I knew who you were. Because 12 years ago, my older brother served under your command in the war. Ice flooded Sebastian's veins. Served under. Who was your brother? Lieutenant James Clark. He died in the ambush at Ciudad Rodrigo, the one where, her voice caught, the one where you lost your entire company. Your parents and sister were killed back in England while you were at war, and when you came home, you found they'd been dead for 3 months without your knowing. That's when you stopped believing in God, isn't it? When you became the godless Duke. Sebastian pulled away, standing abruptly. You knew? This entire time, you knew about my connection to your brother. Yes, but Sebastian, please listen. You lied. You came here under false pretenses, used your position to what? Get close to me? Extract some kind of revenge for your brother's death? The betrayal was a physical ache in his chest. Was any of it real? The kindness, the companionship, he couldn't say love, not now. Not when everything he'd believed might be a calculated deception. It was all real. Vivienne struggled to push herself up further, ignoring her weakness. Sebastian, I came here because I wanted to understand the man my brother died serving. James's letters talked about you constantly, your courage, your compassion, the way you tried to protect your men even when orders demanded otherwise. When he died, when everyone in that company died, people said it was your fault, that you'd been reckless, prioritized glory over strategy. But James's last letter arrived a week after the news of his death, and in it, he wrote that if anything happened to him, I should remember that you'd tried to save them, that you'd argued with your superior officers, begged for different orders, and when those orders were overruled, you'd charged into the ambush first to draw fire away from your men. Sebastian stood frozen, memories flooding back, the screaming, the blood, the complete chaos as French forces surrounded them. He'd tried so hard to save them, had failed so completely. I came to Winterbourne to meet the man my brother trusted with his life, Vivienne continued, her voice steady despite her tears. to see if the hero from James's letters was real or just a soldier's fantasy. And what I found was someone even better, a man who'd survived unbearable loss and was still trying to do right by the people depending on him. A man who loved his niece, who cared about his tenants, who read poetry in secret because beauty still mattered to him, even when he pretended otherwise. I didn't plan to fall in love with you, Sebastian, but I did, completely and irrevocably. You should have told me. His voice was raw. The moment you arrived, you should have told me who you were. I know, and I'm sorry. I was afraid you'd refuse to hire me if you knew. Afraid you'd see me as just another reminder of your worst day. And then, as time passed, I was afraid of this, of you looking at me like I'm looking at you right now, like I'm someone who betrayed you. She wiped at her tears impatiently. If you want me to leave, I understand. I'll resign immediately, find another position. But I needed you to know the truth before I gave you an answer to your proposal. I won't marry you under false pretenses. You deserve honesty, even when it costs me everything I want. Sebastian turned to stare into the fire, his mind racing. Part of him wanted to rage at the deception, to order her from his house and never see her again. But a larger part, the part that had grown over 6 months of watching her with Lily, of debating literature with her, of slowly learning to trust again, recognized the truth in her words. She hadn't come to hurt him. She'd come to understand him, to honor her brother's memory by meeting the man James had admired. And she'd stayed because she'd seen something in him worth loving. Your brother's death was my fault, he said quietly. Not because I was reckless or seeking glory, but because I failed to save him. Failed to save any of them. I've carried that guilt for 12 years, Vivian. It's why I stopped praying. Because what kind of God allows an entire company of good men to die while their commander survives? What kind of God takes my parents and sister while I'm too far away to even say goodbye? The same kind of God who sent my brother's commanding officer back to England, where he could raise his orphaned niece and protect his tenants, and eventually, meet a governess who needed to know that her brother hadn't died for nothing. Vivian's voice was soft but firm. James chose to serve under you. He believed in what you were fighting for, believed in you. His death wasn't meaningless, Sebastian. He saved lives that day. Your letters mentioned 6 men who survived because James held a choke point while they retreated. 6 men who went home to their families because my brother was brave. And because I failed to protect him. And because war is chaos and death and unfair, and sometimes good men die despite everyone's best efforts. She paused, then added quietly, You can't control everything, Sebastian. You can't protect everyone. You can only do your best and forgive yourself for being human. He laughed bitterly. Forgiveness. From the woman who deceived me about her identity for 6 months. Yes, from her, because she knows what it's like to carry grief and guilt, to wonder if she could have changed anything, to wish she could go back and make different choices, and because she loves you enough to risk your anger for the sake of honesty. Sebastian closed his eyes, warring with himself. The rational part of him understood her reasoning, even appreciated her courage in confessing. The wounded part wanted to retreat behind walls, to protect himself from further vulnerability. But there was a third part, the part that had knelt beside her bed and prayed her name, that simply didn't care about the deception. That part only cared that she was alive, that she loved him, that she was offering him a chance at happiness he'd never expected to have again. My brother would have liked you, Vivian said into the silence. He had a weakness for stubborn, honorable men who pretended to be harder than they were. And he had terrible taste in poetry, just like you. He used to recite Byron at the most inappropriate times. Despite everything, Sebastian felt his lips twitch. I don't have terrible taste in poetry. You think Wordsworth is overrated. That's objectively terrible taste. Wordsworth is overrated. The man rhymes mountain with fountain and expects us to celebrate his genius. He's exploring the sublime nature of— Vivian stopped, and he heard the smile in her voice. You're trying to start an argument about poetry, while I'm confessing to deception and you're supposedly angry with me. Sebastian turned to face her, and the expression on his face was complex, hurt and hope tangled together. I am angry. I'm also relieved you're alive, grateful for your honesty, and still hopelessly in love with you. I can feel multiple things simultaneously. It's exhausting. Welcome to the human experience. Vivian held out her hand, an invitation. I can't promise I'll never make mistakes or hurt you unintentionally. I can promise I'll always tell you the truth, even when it's hard, even when it costs me. Because you deserve that, Sebastian. You deserve someone who sees all of you, the grief and the guilt and the goodness underneath, and loves you anyway. He moved back to the bed, taking her hand, but remaining standing, still wrestling with his feelings. When did you decide to tell me? About your brother? About a month ago, but I was afraid, and I kept putting it off. And then I got sick, and I thought— Her voice wavered. I thought if I died without telling you, you'd never know the truth. That I came here for James, but stayed for you. That every moment we shared was real, regardless of how it started. A month ago. Sebastian's memory flickered. The day Lily asked if you'd stay forever, and you said you couldn't make promises you might not keep. Yes, I was thinking about the conversation I knew we needed to have, about what it might cost. He studied her face, the exhaustion, the vulnerability, the love shining through despite her fear of rejection. And he realized that forgiveness wasn't about weighing crimes and punishments. It was about choosing to move forward together, to build something new instead of remaining trapped by the past. I forgive you, he said simply. I forgive you for not telling me immediately. I forgive you for being afraid. I even forgive you for your abysmal taste in poetry, though that's a far greater sin. Vivian laughed, the sound watery but genuine. I'm sorry for the deception, for the fear it caused, for everything except loving you. I'll never apologize for that. Good, because I'm going to ask again, and I'd hate for you to apologize after you've said yes. He knelt again, this time with full awareness of the symbolism. The godless duke kneeling before a governess, offering her everything he had. Vivian Clark, sister of Lieutenant James Clark, governess to my niece, reorganizer of my library, and the woman who taught me that faith comes in many forms. Will you marry me? Will you take a chance on a stubborn, poetry of verse duke who loves you more than he thought possible to love anything? Fresh tears spilled down her cheeks, but she was smiling. Yes, God help me, yes. I'll marry you, Sebastian Thorne. I'll argue with you about poetry and reorganize your life and love you for as long as you'll have me. Forever, then. He surged up to kiss her, gentle because she was still weak, but fervent enough to convey months of repressed longing. She tasted like medicine and salt and hope. And Sebastian thought perhaps this was what prayer felt like, this overwhelming gratitude for something precious and undeserved. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, Vivian rested her forehead against his. We're going to scandalize society. A duke marrying his niece's governess. Let them talk. I've been scandalizing society for 12 years. At least now I'll be doing it for a worthwhile reason. He settled on the edge of the bed, keeping her hand clasped in his. We'll marry quickly, before you can change your mind, or society can interfere. And then we'll travel. Italy, Greece, wherever you want to go. We'll come back when we're ready, and anyone who has a problem with my choice of wife can answer to me. Your tenants will be shocked. My tenants will be delighted. Mrs. Bramwell has been hoping for this since your second week here. She claims you put the warmth back in his grace, which I believe was meant as a compliment, though it sounds vaguely threatening. Vivian laughed again, and the sound filled something in Sebastian's chest that had been empty for far too long. They sat together as afternoon light strengthened, making plans and promises, occasionally arguing about poetry just for the joy of it, and slowly believing that happiness might be possible after all. The wedding took place 4 weeks later in the Winterbourne Chapel, a small, intimate affair, attended only by household staff and a handful of close friends. Lily served as flower girl, beaming with pride at being included in the ceremony, and spent the entire celebration announcing to anyone who'd listen that she'd always known her uncle and Miss Clark were in love. "They look at each other funny," she explained to Mrs. Bramwell, "like people do in books before they kiss." Mrs. Bramwell hid her smile. "Very observant, Miss Lily." "I'm always observant. That's what governesses teach." The celebration was warm and genuine, filled with laughter and music and the kind of joy that comes from genuine affection rather than social obligation. Sebastian had worried that Vivian would be uncomfortable as the center of attention, but she moved through the gathering with natural grace, thanking staff for their service, charming his few friends with intelligent conversation, and generally being exactly herself, which was all he'd ever wanted. When they finally escaped to the master suite, Vivian's belongings already moved in, her books filling empty shelves, her presence transforming the space from bachelor quarters to a shared home. Sebastian found himself uncharacteristically nervous. "Second thoughts?" Vivian asked, reading his expression with the accuracy of someone who'd spent months studying him. "Never. Just grateful. Terrified of losing this. Of losing you." She crossed to him, taking his hands. "You're not going to lose me. I survived consumption, remember? I'm tougher than I look." "You're tougher than anyone I've ever met, including battle-hardened soldiers." He pulled her close, resting his chin on top of her head. "Your brother would be proud of you, of the woman you've become." "I hope so. I think he'd be proud of you too, for surviving, for raising Lily, for learning to love again." She pulled back to look at him. "You're not broken, Sebastian." "You never were. You were grieving, and that's different. Grief is love with nowhere to go. But now you have somewhere to put it, in our marriage, in Lily, in the life we're building together. When did you become so wise? I've always been wise. You were just too stubborn to notice." He laughed and kissed her, and the kiss deepened into something that made words unnecessary. They had time now, years stretching ahead, filled with possibility instead of mere survival. They would argue about poetry and debate philosophy and raise Lily with love instead of duty. They would travel and read and gradually fill the empty rooms of Winterbourne with warmth. And sometimes, in the quiet moments, Sebastian would find himself praying, not to the God he'd rejected 12 years ago, but to the woman beside him, to the life they'd built from grief and hope, to the unexpected grace of second chances. 5 years later, Sebastian stood in the same chapel where they'd married, watching Vivienne place flowers on a memorial plaque bearing Lieutenant James Clark's name. It was one of many such plaques lining the chapel walls, all the men from his company, honored in stone and memory. Vivienne had suggested the memorial 2 years into their marriage, and Sebastian had spent months personally researching each man, writing to families, gathering stories. It had been painful and necessary, this final acknowledgement of loss. And somehow, in the process of honoring the dead, he'd found a way to lay down the guilt he'd carried for so long. Uncle Sebastian! Lily, now 14 and impossibly grown up, called from the doorway. "Father Michaels is asking about Sunday's reading schedule." Sebastian raised an eyebrow. Tell the good father I'll meet with him after services. And remind him I still think his interpretation of Job is overly optimistic." Lily giggled and ran off. Vivienne turned from the memorial, smiling at her husband's irreverence. "You're going to scandalize the new vicar." Hell survive. Father Michaels enjoys a good theological debate. Sebastian moved to stand beside her, reading his brother-in-law's name carved in marble. "Thank you for suggesting this, for helping me find a way to remember them without drowning in guilt. They deserve to be remembered, and you deserve to live without carrying their deaths like penance." She leaned against him, comfortable in a way that still made him grateful. James would have liked seeing his name here, would have liked knowing he mattered. He did matter. They all did. Sebastian wrapped an arm around her waist. "Come on. Mrs. Bramwell is making that roast you love, and if we're late, Lily will eat all the good parts." They walked through Winterbourne together, through halls that now echoed with laughter instead of emptiness. The house had changed over 5 years, brightened with new paint, warmed with fires kept burning, filled with the sounds of living rather than the silence of mourning. Tenants no longer whispered about the godless Duke. Instead, they spoke of the Duke and Duchess who'd opened the manor for harvest festivals, who'd established a school for local children, who'd proven that love could transform even the coldest spaces. That evening, after dinner and laughter and Lily's dramatic recounting of her latest writing adventure, Sebastian and Vivienne retired to their private sitting room. It had become their ritual, an hour before bed to read, to talk, to simply exist in each other's company. "I saw you in the library yesterday," Vivienne said, settling beside him on the sofa, "reading Wordsworth, voluntarily." Sebastian had the grace to look embarrassed. "He's grown on me. Slightly. The man still can't rhyme to save his life, but some of his observations about nature are adequate. Adequate. High praise from you. Don't let it go to your head, or Wordsworth's. The man's ego is insufferable enough without encouragement." She laughed and kissed his cheek. "I love you, you impossible snob. I love you too, even though you have terrible taste in poetry. I have excellent taste in everything, including husbands." "That," Sebastian agreed, pulling her closer, "is indisputably true." They sat together as darkness fell, comfortable in the silence that comes from knowing each other completely. Outside, wind whispered through the Winterbourne grounds, carrying the scent of coming rain. Inside, a fire crackled, and two people who'd found each other through loss and honesty held fast to the life they'd built. And if Sebastian sometimes still whispered Vivienne's name like a prayer, she never mentioned it. Because some prayers weren't meant for God. They were meant for the person who'd taught you that faith could wear a human face, that love was worth the risk of grief, and that even the most faithless heart could learn to hope again. The years continued their forward march. Lily grew into a remarkable young woman, brilliant and compassionate, who eventually married a country squire and filled Winterbourne with grandchildren who called Sebastian grandfather and climbed on his lap demanding stories. He told them about wars and losses, about the importance of honor and the necessity of forgiveness, and about the governess who'd arrived in the rain and changed everything. And if Sebastian sometimes still whispered Vivienne's name like a prayer, she never mentioned it. Because some prayers weren't meant for God. They were meant for the person who'd taught you that faith could wear a human face, that love was worth the risk of grief, and that even the most faithless heart could learn to hope again. He still didn't attend church regularly, but he endowed the local chapel and engaged in spirited theological debates with anyone willing to argue. His faith, such as it was, remained personal and unorthodox, a belief in human resilience, in the redemptive power of love, in the grace of second chances. But everyone who knew him understood that if Sebastian Thorne prayed, It was to the woman who read beside him each evening, who challenged his opinions and reorganized his world, who'd seen him at his worst and loved him anyway. She was his religion, his salvation, his proof that miracles didn't require divine intervention. Sometimes they just required two damaged people brave enough to trust each other with their broken pieces. 30 years after that desperate night when he'd knelt beside her fevered bed, Sebastian found himself doing the same thing again, kneeling, this time beside their shared bed in their shared chambers, holding Vivian's hand as she slept peacefully after a life fully lived. She was 70 now, silver-haired and fragile, but her spirit burned as bright as ever. He was 73, his hands gnarled with age, his body bearing the weight of years and old war wounds. But his love for her had never diminished. If anything, it had grown deeper, richer, more essential with each passing year. "Still here," she murmured, waking from her nap to find him watching her. Still keeping vigil. Always. He pressed a kiss to her knuckles, the gesture as familiar now as breathing. "Where else would I be?" "You've spent half our marriage watching me sleep. It's slightly creepy. You've spent the other half reorganizing my possessions without permission. We're even." She laughed, the sound weaker than it once was, but no less genuine. "I suppose we are, though I maintain my organizational system was superior. Your organizational system was chaos, but it was our chaos." He settled beside her on the bed, and she curled against him with the ease of long practice. "Do you have any regrets about the life we've built?" "Only one." His heart clenched. "What's that?" "That I didn't tell you about James sooner. That we wasted even a day in uncertainty when we could have been together. We weren't ready sooner. We needed time to find our way to each other, to build the foundation strong enough to support a lifetime." He stroked her silver hair, marveling that after 30 years, touching her still felt like a gift. "I regret nothing. Not the arguments about poetry, not the scandals, not the years when society thought I was mad for marrying you. Especially not those years. We were rather scandalous. We were perfect. Are perfect. Will be perfect until the end and whatever comes after." She was quiet for a moment, then asked the question they'd both been dancing around. "Sebastian, when the end comes, for one of us, will you be all right? Will you remember how to keep living?" It was his greatest fear, losing her again. But 30 years of marriage had taught him that love wasn't about holding on. It was about cherishing what you had while you had it, and carrying it forward when you didn't. "I'll grieve," he said honestly. "I'll probably be impossible for a while. But I'll keep living, because that's what you'd want. Because Lily and the grandchildren need me. Because our work, the school, the tenants, the legacy we've built, deserves to continue. And because," his voice roughened with emotion, "because you taught me that endings aren't failures, that love doesn't stop when life does, that I can carry you with me. In every choice I make, every life I touch, every moment I choose hope over despair." Tears slipped down her cheeks. "I don't want to leave you." "Then don't. Not yet. Stay with me a while longer." "I'll try." She pressed her face against his chest, listening to his heartbeat. "But Sebastian, if I do go first, thank you for the life we built. For seeing me when I was invisible to everyone else. For kneeling beside my bed and praying my name when you didn't even believe in prayer. You gave me everything." "No," he corrected gently. "You gave me everything. Purpose and faith and a reason to hope. A family and a future and the chance to be someone better than I was. You saved me, Vivian, long before I saved you from that fever. You saved me from a life of emptiness masquerading as dignity." They held each other as evening fell, two souls who'd found harbor in each other through all of life's storms. And when Vivian's breathing eventually evened into sleep, Sebastian found himself praying again, not desperately as he had 30 years ago, but with gratitude, thanking whatever force governed the universe for the gift of this woman, this life, this love that had taught him faith came in human form. He didn't pray to God, hadn't in decades, but he prayed to memory and meaning, to the years they'd shared and the legacy they'd built, to the proof that love could heal even the deepest wounds and make even the most faithless heart believe in grace. And in the morning, when they woke together, still here, still breathing, still blessed with another day, Sebastian would kiss his wife and argue about poetry and thank every power in the universe that he'd been given the chance to love her. Because that, he'd learned, was prayer enough. That was everything.